Good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Welcome to today's IGC event titled Green Jobs as Drivers of Growth in African Cities. Interesting topic. I look forward to the conversation here today. My name is Kagiso Tshukudu. I'm the Cities Research and Policy Officer here at Cities That Work program under the IGC. Cities That Work is an IGC initiative that builds on our work to translate economic research and practical insight into very clear urban policy guidance for different cities in the continent. And in the next month or so, the IGC is actually putting together a policy growth brief that looks deeply into the question of translating or transitioning sub-Saharan African cities towards this green growth path. So look out for that policy brief in our website. It will be launched in about 4 to 5 weeks or so. And this morning we published a blog also that seeks to generate a discussion around the importance of green jobs agenda that need to be met by very efficient urban governance systems in African continent. We'll share the link shortly on our chat for you to keep track of that. So before we start, let's review some housekeeping items. All the attendees have been muted to minimize any background noise. If you have a question, kindly, during the presentation, kindly just type it in the Q&A session there into the box in the bottom of your screen, and we will see that and make sure that we get to respond to that the best way that we can. We are going to have a designated time at the end of the panel discussion where we will answer specific questions that attendees are posting. So please keep them coming. We'll make sure that we address them as best as we can. And as you do so, kindly state your name and the organization that you are affiliated with, just for ease of reference and appreciation of who you guys are and where you are watching from. Video and audio, and those will be made available on the IGC's website after today. And I would also like to point out that there will be a very brief survey immediately following today's presentation. So please take a minute just to fill that in. Your feedback is very valuable to us. We'll be using the hashtag World Cities Day, so kindly engage on social media in this conversation the best way that you can. So ahead of World Cities Day, which is on the 31st of October, the IGC hosts this event today, titled, actually we hold this event today aligned to this year's theme of World Cities Day, or adapting cities for climate resilience. And we think our topic today on green jobs in Africa is equally fitting, on the eve of COP26 that is beginning next week. And in recognizing the importance of facilitating developing cities, in policy formulation towards a sustainable green future. So the IGC arranged this session here today to host this event that brings into focus the challenges and opportunities, that emerge out of this topic. Some key points to introduce the subject. As you know, this rapid rate of urbanization in the continent brings with it very complex and sort of urgent challenges that we are all having to grapple with. The urbanization trend in the continent characterized by unemployment, low incomes and so forth, low gains in economic growth brings with it very complex challenges that we need to, at a strategic policy level, begin to grapple with. And to compound these challenges, is the global climate change crisis that contributes an additional agents, both in terms of the increasing rural urban migration that the continent is experiencing, obviously as the changing climate causes the negative shocks to agricultural productivity as we know it. But also, most importantly, the need to ensure that as urbanization happens, it is not just productive, but is also sustainable. And I think that brings with it a dimension that brings us here today to grapple with this topic. And there are very promising arguments around the line of industrialization, green industrialization, as the passage through which the continent can begin to transition itself towards this green growth. So therefore, in this decade of action towards attainment of sustainable development goals, the key question then emerges: how do our cities in Africa create sustainable jobs at scale in a manner that is impactful and meaningful in this green economy era? And that's the question that we will begin to generate today and do our best to tackle. And I'm glad that I'm joined by a fantastic team of panelists that will help me digest this topic. I'll be putting specific questions to each of my panelists here today. And then in the middle of our conversation today, we'll have an open dialogue between ourselves as panelists, and thereafter cede to our attendees to also pose their questions, and we will address those as best as we can. So let me introduce our panelists here today. First of all, Sarah Colenbrander, who is the Director of Program Climate and Sustainability from ODI. Thank you so much for being with us, Sarah. We really appreciate it. We also have Kgomotso Tolamo, who is the Program Manager for Productive Cities at the South African Cities Network. Thank you so much for being here, Kgomotso. We really value the time that you're spending with us here today. And then finally, but not least, Laura Naliaka, who is the Trade Policy Fellow at the Africa Trade Policy Center at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you so much, Naliaka, for being here with us today. I think we will let the panelists greet you and sort of get to interact with you when their time to speak comes. Let me immediately start with you, Sarah, just to break the ice for us. In Africa, urbanization alone is found, does not seem to be delivering on the promise of jobs and economic growth that we see in other parts of the world. Precarious living conditions remain very prevalent in our African cities, with 2/3 of our urban population actually falling below the $5 a day poverty line. However, prospects of sustainable urban development, in the continent, it has opened up a conversation around this green jobs topic. What do you consider, Sarah, to be these green jobs, and how are they so key to African cities in becoming more resilient going forward? Sarah?
Thank you so much, Kagiso, and a warm thanks to the IGC for hosting and catalyzing this important conversation. I'm Sarah Colenbrander, and I lead the Climate and Sustainability Program at ODI. I think picking up firstly on your point about the current conditions in many African cities, I think it's important for us to remember that people mostly move to cities in search of opportunity. People are looking to find work, they are looking to support their families, and they're looking to support economic development. The challenge that they face as individuals is finding those opportunities to support their families and to upskill themselves. And the challenge that political and business leaders face is growing national economies, particularly in the face of this booming young workforce, giving them that chance to earn a decent wage and to upskill. So the starting point for thinking about this is that most jobs are low carbon, healthcare, education, etc. And most others have the potential, with some changes, to be greener: retail, agriculture, construction. But considering the scale of the employment challenge facing African cities, we really need to be thinking on a much bigger scale about how you create jobs. And that's a story about structural transformation, moving people from agriculture, small-scale manufacturing, or non-tradable services through industrialization, which has the potential to create millions of decent jobs. And that's where we have this really booming opportunity with the global greening of the economy. We are seeing a massive reconfiguration of global value chains in response to pressures to decarbonize, both from consumers and from policymakers. We have new technologies coming through, electric cars, solar panels, green building materials, which have long and complicated value chains behind them with lots of opportunities for different countries to play a role. And we also have massive increases in demand for more established products, whether bicycles or LED bulbs. And so there's opportunities as those value chains expand and try to diversify to enhance their resilience for African countries to get a much larger piece of that growing pie. And the thing to remember with this is that these are going to be urban jobs. Manufacturing industries need agglomeration with its more efficient access to inputs, to labor, and transport connections to global markets. So attracting these industries has the opportunity to make African cities more resilient, not necessarily in your more obvious ways like building storm surge protection and so on, but through boosting people's incomes and diversifying economies, enabling public and private investment in adaptation, and reducing exposure to economic shocks. So there is a huge opportunity in green jobs as Africa seeks to industrialize, powered by things like Africa Continental Free Trade Area. I don't want to downplay the challenges of structural transformation or of finding unique niches in these emerging green value chains. Countries all over the world, China, Germany, Mexico, are competing to find that space. Even within Africa, Ethiopia is competing with Ghana, is competing with South Africa. But the reality is that green urban industries are the growth story of the 21st century, and it's imperative that Africa finds opportunities for its young urban workers to be a part of that opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that. I think it sort of brings us the whole variety of angles through which we can look into this topic. And I think as we do so, Kgomotso, I think let me get to you here. A lot has been said, about the ability for African cities to leapfrog an emission-intensive development path and instead adopt a much more greener growth solutions to, as Sarah has been saying here. Which economic sectors, I think, in our continent, do you think present these potentials for these leapfrog opportunities towards a green economy in sub-Saharan African cities? And is the environment ripe for innovation? I think, as Sarah said, can't downplay the challenges. Is the environment ripe for innovation? And without loading the question, what needs to be done to get more traction in this space? Kgomotso?
Yeah, thank you, Kagiso. Thank you for that question, and thank you, Sarah, for that very well-positioned opening. And also to the team for inviting us to speak on this very important topic. I think there are a few questions that you've asked there, Kagiso, and I would like to engage with the first one, perhaps in a different way. I think how we've been engaging with the growth of sectors in sub-Saharan Africa has been around which sectors are contributing the most to our GDPs, how do we maximize those, and how do we sort of start dealing with the issue of employment creation. But so I would like to say that there are a few ways that we can look at which we can respond to the question of which sectors are most primed to a green transition. But how I think it might play out in our context is that there'll be a continued focus on those sectors that give us the most advantage in terms of GDP growth. I think we will still for a very long time be reliant on mineral resources and so forth. But the question would become, how do we make these industries greener, as Sarah has just been speaking to? For example, in South Africa, where we are very highly dependent on coal-fired power stations, our conversation is around how do we make this industry greener. So, and this, and something that I would like to put forward in addition to this is also that, you know, the challenge in a context like ours is that we're not just looking at, from an economic standpoint, which sectors are most primed. We also have challenges as it relates to high levels of inequality, high incidences of poverty, as well as the largest youth population, largest labor force, youth labor force, and so forth. So as we green particular sectors, the questions that we also ask ourselves, it starts off with which sectors, but I think it continues to, of those sectors, which ones will give us the most mileage around narrowing the inequality, narrowing incidences of poverty, as well as increasing labor absorption, especially for youth. So I'm responding to say that, you know, as Sub-Saharan Africa and I guess other developing nations, our challenge is not just that of creating green sectors or going greener, but inequality, poverty, and so forth. So in the just green transition in South Africa that we're speaking about, the topical question is that, as you're saying, we need to move away from coal-powered energy sources. How do you ensure that entire cities that have built their economies around the coal value chain, jobs are not lost there? Households are not taken into further poverty because of this transition. So I think, and what I would also like to put forward to our audience is around that it's not just a sector focus. So I know I'm not giving you a clear-cut response, but I'm saying that, you know, it's in our context in particular, I think we can easily point at sectors. We can easily say the transport sector, energy sector, waste, etc. But I think it's important that we be cognizant of the other implications as it relates to those sectors. So your question also spoke to, is it ripe for innovation? I think the second bit of your question. And I would like to draw on the agriculture sector as an example. One of, as I mentioned, there are a few sectors that we can look at when we speak about which sectors are most opportune. The agriculture sector is interesting in the sense that, you know, Africa has a high amount of arable land. It has almost half of our labor force, whether it's from subsistence farming to commercial, is involved in the agriculture sector. And it's a very high contributor to GDPs across our varying markets. But what has been interesting as we observe the agriculture sector has been how consumers have been demanding a different approach to farming. There's increasing interest in traceability of products. How do I know that this product was farmed in a way that does not harm the environment? There's interest, there is increasing, I mean, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but here in South Africa, I'm seeing labels more and more that say that the cotton that this shirt was made from can be traced back. So consumers are largely driving that. And as tech innovators have been innovating around things like blockchain, they've been using that to improve traceability of products. I know entities like Nestle, for example, have been using that in other markets to ensure that the products that they put out can be traced to good farming practices that don't harm the planet and so forth. So I feel like I've said a lot, so I'm going to pause there. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Kgomotso. That is quite insightful from the perspective of, you know, your position there, and I think how we need to actually look at the question that speaks to mainly which of these sectors drive our GDP the most, and how do we best position them in this regard. Naliaka, let me come to you here. Currently, many sub-Saharan countries have this ambition to better integrate into these global value chains, you know, with the intention to participate at the higher value-added stages. And cities are actually strategically placed to enable this process, right? And in order to achieve these sustainable cities, you know, we need to consider these green global value chains in a manner that can position us to best do so. So what are the policy measures, both at continental and regional level, that are needed to sort of generate and promote these new green jobs in sub-Saharan Africa? And any efforts now that are beginning to maybe strategically look into this thing and sort of put more energy at policy level, at a regional, continental level, from your perspective?
Thank you, Kagiso, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone who is joining us from various parts. I'm really delighted to take part in this really timely and pertinent conversation on green economies and also job creation of green jobs. And I think I will emphasize on it's really timely because, as you know from the famous Italian philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli, the best time to prepare for war is not when the war is imminent, but rather when the times are peaceful. So in our case, the timing couldn't have been more apt because as you have mentioned, COP26 is starting in a few days. And other than that, if we look at various projections, we see that by 2035, almost half of Africa's population will be living in urban areas. And of course, this will put pressure of course, we'll need to look at job creation. It will put demand for employment creation. So this, of course, begs the question on how can we create sustainable cities, which will, of course, also promote job creation, and not just job creation, but green jobs. So firstly, some of the policies that we can look at can be something around investments. How can we promote green investments into the continent? And I think here I should mention a recent study which was done by the World Resource Institute, which actually shows that dollar for dollar green investments generally create more jobs in the near term than unsustainable investments. And just to give you a feel of the findings, some of the statistics, investing in solar voltaic energy creates an average of 1.5 times as many jobs as investing the same amount of money in fossil fuels. So this just underscores the importance of having green investments, investing in green sectors. And other than that, of course, as you're heading to COP26, we can remind ourselves that almost most of the African countries have signed and ratified the COP21 Paris Agreement, which commits them to reduce greenhouse emissions. And of course, to do this, they need to have investments which will support this. But at the moment, the global finance flows, global climate finance flows into the continent is only about 4% of the global total, which is directed to sub-Saharan Africa. Yet, some of the estimates from the AFDB suggest that the continent requires about 20 to 30 billion USD annually to meet its objectives as outlined in their COP21 agreement, and particularly their nationally determined contributions. So this just further rubber stamps the importance of having policies which will promote green investments in the region. And a starting point can be the AfCFTA. And the good thing is investments is one of the protocols which are being negotiated in the phase 2 of the AfCFTA agreement. And here it will be good not just to look at the quantity of investment that will flow through the continent, but also the quality of investment. And when we're talking about the quality, it's when you're talking about is it a sustainable investment? And also, other than just looking at the AfCFTA from the investment protocol, we can go back to the protocol on covering the phase 1 issue on reducing the tariffs on goods being traded across the continent. As we know from the AfCFTA schedule, the plan is to reduce tariffs on 90% of the merchandise goods traded within the continent. And of course, for the 10%, 7% the countries have the liberty to exclude them for a number of years. And for 3% of the total goods which are being traded, they have the option of they have the option of not exporting them to tariffs. So what this means is, when it comes to investments, or rather when it comes to products which are likely to promote the green economy, the plan can be, or rather we can have an addendum in the phase 1 protocol, which says that they shouldn't be part of the excluded or sensitive items list. Because this will promote now the trade of such goods within the continent and the flow of such goods within the continent, and of course ultimately this will boost investment in the sector. And then my second point will be on, of course, as Kgomotso and Sarah have rightly talked about innovation and technology. So of course it will be important to have policies which of course support technology and innovation in the various countries and also in the region. And of course, this can just be technologies which reduce pollution, or technologies or innovations which promote greater resource efficiency in the production processes. And I think, of course, Kgomotso has referred to the blockchain technology. So it will be really good as you're moving forward, we take into account some of the post-industrial revolution technologies. And another example can be the artificial intelligence, which can be used to optimize green technologies deployment within the continent. But it is important for us to note that whenever we talk about innovation and technology, we also have to bring in the issues around intellectual property rights. So we need to have an environment which protects intellectual property rights, because this is likely to encourage innovation among the populace. And at the moment, Africa is not really performing too well when it comes to this sector, because what we use to measure the intellectual property rights environment in the region or in a country can be just be looking at the number of patents. And if we look at the statistics, Africa actually lags behind globally, because in 2017, the continent only had 1,330 patents, compared to a continent like Asia, which had 592,000 patents. And of course, we have to note that in Africa, most of these patents are actually not registered by the residents. It tends to be by foreigners. And of course, here I'll go back to the AFCFTA, because also we have one of the protocols which will be negotiated in the phase 2, among the phase 2 issues, the intellectual property rights, and it can cover some of these issues, which of course will be an enabler to promoting innovation, and of course that will lead to more technologies that can promote green jobs. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Naliaka, for bringing that perspective in. I think one of the things that I wanted to touch on before we get into a sort of an open discussion amongst us was this thing of the role of national government in and how it relates with the city. I don't know who to send this question to, but maybe to you, Kgomotso, because you're specifically with cities. How important is it that the national government actually plays a role in the city's agenda and facilities and support as best as it can as we think of going green in a much more impactful way going forward? I know that the South African situation might be different from other countries in Africa, but maybe just shed some light on the relationship between cities and the government, and I think how that coordination is efficient going forward from your perspective.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Kagiso. And it is a very important consideration, especially because some of the things that national governments commit to are implemented and operationalized at the city level. I think we can identify challenges to in that disjuncture between what national governments commit to and what cities are resourced to actually implement. I think, one of the things is to ensure strong intragovernmental relations, especially when it comes to developing these large-scale projects. As we were speaking about the Africa Free Trade Agreement, one of the roles that we play as the South African Cities Network is to be the voice that sort of advocates for cities at the national government platform. So to take issues that impact upon cities and engage with national governments around those. And one of those has been around port cities, for example, like we have a city called eThekwini, that could be known also as Durban. That's a port city and one of the largest ports on the continent, but also a lot of goods get to Durban first and then the rest of the SADC region. So there is, as our national government is committing to all these things as it relates to the free trade area, it definitely impacts upon the city of Durban, for example. So the questions then become, how will national government support cities to operationalize some of these commitments? So I think that's an important consideration first. One of the things that we're also seeing as important is that it's important to ensure that there is city representation even at the national level. So some of the ways that this can actually be implemented is how our National Treasury has been doing it. They have a component within the National Treasury called the City Support Program. And that City Support Program is largely designed to offer technical assistance to implement projects at the city level. It's explicitly focused on the largest metros within South Africa. So by ensuring that there is representation around the table when these conversations are being had around, for example, as we say that the manufacturing sector has to become greener. We know that there's cities that, for example, there's a city called PE, Port Elizabeth, that's largely it's largely driven by the automotive industry. And for that, it's important as we speak about how will we make the automotive industry greener, how will the city of Port Elizabeth, for example, be supported by national government to be able to implement? We found that the biggest needs are around technical assistance in terms of human capital. So how do we ensure that there's the human capital at the city level to be able to engage with these green transition? And we also know that it's a costly exercise, and some of these exercises don't, because of how city governments, city budgets are structured, they would not always be budgetary allowance for these transitions. So how are the monies provided for cities to be able to implement some of these transitions? And then at the end of the day, how are the cities supported? So you will find that there's need over and above what's offered within the national context. Maybe there could be support that could be offered by other governments and other countries that have embarked on similar journeys. How can national government correspond with other national governments that have succeeded, for example, with green transition in the automotive sector to support specific cities? So there are a few challenges and a few areas of opportunity, but I would say, one of the most important things is ensuring that there is human capital support and a voice representing cities around the national table. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Kgomotso. Sarah, do you want to maybe jump in there to elaborate any point of interest from what Kgomotso just said?
Oh, I don't think I could add to such an excellent and comprehensive answer, except to say that, of course, as you mentioned, some of the challenges are even greater outside South Africa, where there's greater human capital deficits and cities are less empowered. They don't have such a far-sighted constitution in particular. But I think that was a superb answer.
Absolutely. So I think, so in this phase, then one of the things that we wanted to expand a little bit more was on the AFCFTA, which I think Naliaka did a good job of expanding on what prospects of that would be and how we can ensure that we use those opportunities to drive this this green growth transition. I don't know if anybody might want to expand on that aspect that Naliaka expanded on the AFCFTA, Sarah or Kgomotso.
I would like to put it to Sarah first.
Sure. And this time you can tell me what a wonderful answer I had and everyone will be delighted. So I think the main thing is actually, I'd like to pick up on the point that Laura made earlier about the size of the urban market that's coming down the line in sub-Saharan Africa with this pace of urbanization. You are going to have millions of new consumers showing up who mostly face these chronic infrastructure and service deficits, and who hopefully, if we're on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and African countries' individual national plans, should be seeing rising per capita incomes and aspirations. And so ideally, the African Continental Free Trade Area should be spurring intra-regional trade to help meet that domestic or regional urban demand. Green building materials, food, water and sanitation services and systems, transboundary electricity supplies, and so on. There's huge opportunities there to provide a wealth of capital and consumer goods in a greener way within the region. I think the challenge that the trade negotiators and trade policymakers currently face, and again, Laura, please pick up on this further, is how you design the terms of this new free trade agreement to favor environmental goods and services and avoid creating lock-in to high carbon pathways or to encourage maladaptation just by creating the wrong incentives. So for example, it's at this point now, right at the outset of finalizing the second phase of the trade agreement, that negotiators should be thinking about the design of investment protocols or intellectual property protocols to really unlock finance and to really unlock knowledge transfer in these critical green sectors, particularly for cities.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Quite expansive. I think the other thing that we wanted to touch on during this the remaining 15 minutes or so, on the issue of.
Can I just come in a bit on the AFCFTA?
Absolutely, yeah, please.
I think the other thing I'd like to mention when it comes to the AFCFTA is we can look at the type of investments that flow within the continent. Now, this is the intra-African FDI and the extra-African FDI. That is the kind of investments that are currently flowing into the continent. If you look at some of the greenfield investment data, what you will realize is that intra-African FDI tends to be more diversified. And here we find now investments in maybe the manufacturing sectors, among other areas. But if we look at the investments which are coming from outside the continent, they are mostly going to the extractive sector. And as you know, these extractive sectors are some of those which we know are the main concerns when it comes to transition to a green environment, to a green economy. So this means just the AFCFTA again will be one of the channels to boost or rather provide a platform to promote intra-regional FDI flow. And now the positive aspect is that this will just be doubling down on the flows which are currently flowing through the continent, which are in the right sectors, but also, as I had mentioned earlier, just having policies in place to ensure that they are sustainable, rather the quality is right. Okay.
Thank you, Naliaka. And one of the things that we also wanted to look into was the issue of balancing this pressing local incentives, actually creating jobs for our people, right? I think every government wants to ensure that you facilitate and create opportunities for employment for the citizens. But at the same time, how do you balance that with the objectives of climate action objectives that we have to attain? And obviously, I think there's a room there where governments and international bodies could begin to coordinate and get the balance right, achieve the objective without compromising employment opportunities for your own people. At the same time, create opportunities for employment without compromising climate action objectives. Do we get that balance right? I mean, do we have enough coordination between governments and international bodies to sort of try and get that balance right so that we can get more cooperation and understanding of the particular complex situations that Africa finds itself in? I don't know who to send this to. Maybe Naliaka, do you want to start with that, and then other colleagues can expand on it?
Yeah, okay, sure. I can start with that, and I think I'll build on what I had alluded to earlier on. Most of the African countries have already signed and ratified the COP21 Paris Agreement. So of course, this ties them to they need to reduce greenhouse emissions within their countries. And now that means, in as much as in the long term, in the short term, maybe implementing certain policies might not make the current government look good in the eyes of the populace, but in the long run, there are certain things that are going to matter. But also from the statistics I mentioned earlier on, when it comes to job creation, we are finding that once you transition to a green economy, you're likely to create more jobs. So these are some of the things I think when we are talking about what is the collaboration between, or the synergies between the national governments and the international bodies that you can be looking at on. So it will be a matter of how does one support the other. So if the national government needs certain support, if the national government needs support to achieve some of the objectives they've put forward, and in the case of the Paris 21, it will be the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. So the synergy could be looking at how can we work together with the international bodies to achieve these objectives that we have already put forward. I think that will be my contribution for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah, do you want to pick up on that? I think as you do so, one of the questions that came in from one of the attendees here, Jonathan, thank you for the question, Jonathan, is how much of a role is there, for carbon pricing and carbon taxes in promoting green jobs in Africa? Can a carbon tax be politically acceptable when so many countries are subsidizing fuel? Sarah?
Thanks very much, Kagiso. So first I want to pick up on the other question about local incentives versus global objectives. Yeah. I think that's a really common narrative, and it's a particularly common narrative in the weeks before a big COP. So not surprised to see it surfacing again. I guess what I would really encourage people to do is to think really critically about who is understood to be a local beneficiary in this case. Mm-hmm. So for example, if we think of, obviously, as Naliaka's alluded to, Africa is a major commodity exporter, including of oil and gas. And the benefits of oil and gas are not shared equitably in most countries. It's a relatively small elite with their cars who benefit not only from the revenues that come in from oil, but also from the subsidies that are allocated to that oil. There's not very much job creation with those industries. There is, of course, scope to do it better. And we've got examples from all over the world that show that oil and gas is not necessarily a curse. But I think we do need to, before instinctively aligning ourselves with a local versus global, we need to look critically at who is local in this case and how much are they currently benefiting from the business as usual development model. Secondly, I just wanted to pick up on Jonathan's great question, which is to say about the role of carbon pricing and carbon taxes in Africa. I'm going to focus particularly on sub-Saharan Africa here, because I think that economic model is really different from North Africa. And actually, I think South Africa either has or is contemplating a carbon tax at the moment. So looking at the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, the reality is that carbon pricing works when you have a lot of carbon to price. And most of sub-Saharan Africa currently does not have a significant carbon footprint, which is not to say that shouldn't be a tool worth considering in the arsenal, but relative to the other opportunities, it's not necessarily your obvious low-hanging fruit as a source of revenue or to steer investment. There's much more need on things like investing in human capital, providing the basic low-carbon infrastructure investment, which a carbon price won't necessarily facilitate. I think that the second half of your answer is actually illuminates the much lower hanging fruit, which is a story about subsidizing fuel. In most countries that have energy subsidies, the majority of those subsidies do not reach the poorest. They are overwhelmingly consumed by the rich. And so you have a handout to an elite within the country. And that's not good for climate mitigation. It encourages profligate consumption of oil. And it's not good for adaptation because the elites already have a relative capacity to insulate themselves against the impacts of climate change. So fossil fuel subsidy reform, as politically contentious an issue as carbon pricing, but one that has a much quicker opportunity to deliver against urgent human development needs and to create the kind of structural economic incentives that more favor a low carbon development path for African countries.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't know if Kgomotso or Naliaka have any burning thing to expand on.
Not really. That was a brilliant response. And I actually appreciate the point you made, Sarah, around understanding who will benefit. Because I mean, across all of it, when we think about green jobs, when we think about a transition to green, who will benefit and over what terms, you know, over what duration, and how do we balance all these, the urgency of job creation, the urgency of creating decent jobs that pay people a living wage, and the urgency to for greener economies. So I think that's a very important question you put forward, Sarah. Who will benefit from some of these things that, such as the carbon tax? So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think we have mentioned research and innovation in part of our conversation so far, and how critical it is, right, to get this right. And I think the question might be, you know, do we have enough of that momentum in the continent towards, you know, investing in research in this space in a manner that you know, African countries can begin to move towards realizing the potential of green jobs? Or is it something that substantially needs to be looked into, budgeted for, and done in ways that maybe we are not sort of highlighting the importance of actually committing to that going forward? I don't know, Naliaka?
Sure, I can take that. Well, when it comes to innovation and technology, we can look at, let's look at the maybe the research institutions. When we look at our universities, how much is allocated to fund research projects? How many grants are they receiving? What part of the national government is going towards supporting this? Because we start at the foundational level, which is the university, so that when the students are coming out, they are well equipped to deal with the industries that they have to be in, or rather the industries that we envisage to have in the continent to promote the green transition. And secondly, we can also look at the prevalence, or rather the rise of technology hubs. I think Kenya and Nigeria, and I think also Ghana, are currently known as being some of the countries which have a number of technology hubs. Now the question will be, for the technology hubs, are some of the innovations they are putting out or working on going to support the green transition? Or how else can they be supported in some of the products that they are working on? Does it mean that we need maybe we need people to come in, maybe to share the knowledge, maybe people from other countries who have already implemented some of the things that we aim to do in our countries, that so that they can be knowledge transfer. And thirdly, also when it comes to innovation and technology, we can also go back to investment, that is FDI, especially that which is coming from countries which are more advanced in this area. And here we'll be looking at the spillover effect. When the company is coming to set up in a particular country, is their technology going to percolate to the rest of the people in the country? And now that also means, again, it will go back to the policies. Again, do we have policies which will support knowledge transfer? when we have companies setting up in the various countries.
Sarah?
We all have thoughts.
Yeah.
So I am going to say something provocative, because otherwise what's the point of a webinar? Which is to say, I think that we need to look really, if African countries and cities are to genuinely seize this opportunity, I think there's a need to think really critically about whether working within the current architecture offers that opportunity. Let's look at the countries that have genuinely achieved structural transformation in an impressive way in recent decades. And obvious examples here would be places like China and South Korea. And neither of them have done that with your usual practice of counting on the West to do knowledge transfer and technology transfer and working within the UNFCCC's nice little tick box categories of climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. I'm not saying there's not goodwill behind those things, but they are not sufficient to counteract the structural power relations that preclude some kind of profound economic shift that we're talking about here. If Africa is to be a regional trade center with rich domestic green value chains linked across the continent. And so I think at this point, it's worth thinking really critically about what it takes to take Naliaka's points and go that step further. So for a country like China basically agreed to open up its markets to the West in return for genuine industrial partnerships. And that provided opportunities for China to adopt, take on, learn about, steal, choose your word, depending on where you sit on the political spectrum, a huge range of technologies. And now it is the powerhouse of solar and wind manufacturing, among other things, electric vehicle manufacturing, among other things. And so thinking much more critically about so-called international development partners and how they should be working to meaningfully hand over the technologies required to be low carbon and climate resilient, I think is going to require something beyond the scope of what current market norms allow, and a really coordinated, joined up approach across the continent, because together that market that we talked about earlier is huge and should have a much bigger piece of the value chains, rather than just being producers of the commodities and recipients of the products at the end.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sarah. Kgomotso?
Great, thank you for that. And I think, as it relates to innovation and the research agenda, I think, one of the things that remains critical is around also the ICT infrastructure to enable this. And I think this is something that must not be forgotten, and something that even at the city level can be enabled. Cities can steer more investment towards ensuring that the infrastructure exists to be able to enable some of these innovations. And the question around, are we putting in enough investment, even as, for example, national governments? We know the norm is that national governments would be the ones to sort of fund that first bit of research towards innovative products. I think what is interesting in the African context is that, if you follow the tech and innovation sector, it's not just governments. There's a lot of appetites from large-scale venture capital investors to participate in one way or another in Africa. And I think Naliaka raised an interesting point around the patent, who actually holds the patents for some of these things that venture capital investors actually put their money behind. So I think, and just from observing the tech and innovation sector, I think there is enough interest from external parties for national governments to leverage. And I think if that environment was a bit, that interface between innovators and people looking to invest in these innovations, and the conversation around how will governments ensure that there will be lasting benefits towards citizens in this context, is an interesting interface that should be paid attention to. And then the last bit is around Africa across the continent is ripe with innovation. I know there are probably 5 big markets that external investors are interested in. But across the continent, I think with enough government cooperation, with enough interest around the regulatory and policy side, that's definitely an area that could be scaled up, in an area when you look at things like how e-commerce platforms have connected even smallholder farmers to larger value chains, how we have seen improvements in irrigation, in farming as well because of tech and innovation. I think if that was something that could be capitalized and there was greater attention paid to it, we could definitely see even improvement on the ground, based on those things. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Kgomotso. I also wanted to ask you guys on, in terms of demonstrating at city level, actually focusing on this transformative green job industries, are special economic zones the vehicle? They're coming up all over the continent in one way or the other, with all sorts of criticisms to some of the models there. But in terms of what they could do in terms of just being focused and demonstrating what these green jobs could be, do you see those as something that the continent can adopt, and can they work, and where they could? Naliaka and then Sarah, or any of you that can.
I don't mind going. It's interesting, we're actually just speaking about one during one of our webinar discussions yesterday, and it's definitely the thing of the times to create more. I think it benefits in how it narrows attention to particular areas. I think how it could be improved upon is around ensuring where it's located, first of all. I think the geographical location is highly important, and not just in terms of have it in the best suburbs, but have it in the areas where there is actual need. And sometimes those areas might conflict with where investors might conflict with investor risk appetite. So geographical location is definitely important, and to ensure that the people who need to benefit from them actually do. I think something that's also critical is ensuring that one of the case studies we have, there's an area called the Atlantis Spatial Economic Zone in Cape Town. And one of its focus areas is around skilling and reskilling residents within that area, so that they're primed to actually absorb the job opportunities that are created within that economic zone. So it can definitely be used in ways that benefit the community. But then again, as I said, it also depends on, is there risk appetite from investors to be in areas that may not offer them the type of ROI that they are used to. For example, there are great commercial zones where they know that if I put my money in there, I'll definitely get the type of return on investment that I need. And these areas where these SEZs are located might not offer that. I guess then the conversation will then go back to governments. Are governments willing to cushion where investors might have some sort of apprehension? But I definitely think in terms of if they are positioned where the people who have the greatest need can benefit, and are structured in such a way that it's not the 10 people at the top who will benefit, but it actually trickles down, then I think it's something that could potentially work. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Sarah?
Thanks, Kagiso. I definitely agree with Kgomotso's points. I guess just to add, I think this is a real opportunity to bring together the urban and industrial, in that to make a special economic zone work not just for business, and definitely to make the ROI that is necessary to attract that private investment in the space. It's also worth thinking about what is going to be necessary in the future for the people who are going to work in that SE special economic zone to thrive as well. And so there's a couple of points around that. The first is the location of the SEZ. I know a number of African nations are currently investing massively in rail and ports, and making sure that those connectivity investments are really joined up with where your industry is going to be to improve your access to inputs and markets is really key. Making sure that the SEZ is surrounded by affordable housing, ideally decent housing with access to green space and with mixed use, things like opportunities for retail, schools, hospitals, etc. Because what you see in a number of Southeast Asian countries that have experimented with SEZs is that they do successfully attract industry, but the costs for the workers to serve that industry are really dire. You know, in Cambodia, you have people who work in the garments industries commute 2 hours each way. And if you're working a 10 or 12-hour day, like when do you live? You know, when you, and it's not good for the industries either, because people, you have this huge churn through of people who suffer from ill health and so on. And so I think that's an opportunity for front runners like Ethiopia that are experimenting with SEZs to really prove that this is an opportunity to deliver jobs for the people and boost living standards for the people in a way that also works for business on the continent.
Thank you, Sarah. Naliaka, any thoughts?
Actually, Sarah and Kgomotso have given a comprehensive answer. But what I will add on is, I think now we are in the phase where consumers are really keen on the products that we currently have ethically produced. Now, this of course goes back to what both of them have said, but also more importantly, what the government and also the investors can look at is, because the governments are giving you certain incentives to invest in the country, but in return you also have to take into consideration some of the green technologies that will ultimately promote, will be helpful or promote, creation of green jobs and green transition. I think that's it from my end.
Wonderful, thank you so much. There's a question there in the Q&A from Stephen. Maybe if you guys could just run through it and then type it in, or then maybe just elaborate it verbally through here. If you're inclined to take on the question, quite interesting and quite elaborate there from Stephen. So I don't know, we are just about to head towards closure, so I'd like to maybe, I think besides Stephen's question, that there isn't much coming in from attendees yet, so just sort of appreciating your well thought out in contributions and inputs so far. Maybe as we do so in the next 5 minutes, as we wrap up, any takeaway points or last burning issue that you wanted to maybe share with us here today as we head towards closure?
I think I can go first. And just in a nutshell, I think it will be really important for the continent to leverage on the AFCFTA, because the AFCFTA has the capability to address most of these issues, which will be important as we transition to a green economy. Because we're looking at mainstreaming environmental issues in the implementation at the national level. We're looking at some of the issues which can spur innovation. And here we have the protocol on intellectual property rights. We have a protocol on investment, which can also be framed in such a way that it's not just investment, but how can we promote, or rather how can we accelerate green investments in the continent? And also Kgomotso had referred to e-commerce. There's also a protocol on e-commerce which can be leveraged on. So I think in one line is we really need to leverage on the AFCFTA as we move towards the green transition.
Thank you so much. Wonderfully put, Naliaka. Kgomotso?
Thank you. I'm just going to leverage on your last point there, Naliaka. I think what will be instrumental to that will also be ensuring cooperation between countries. I think if we are to see the type of benefits that could potentially be realized from the free trade agreement, it will require intense engagement and intense cooperation between countries across our respective regions. And so as a takeaway from me, I think one of the most important things one of the things that are important to me is to ensure that even as we consider this transition to green, we consider the ways in which, and we ensure that the policies and regulations that we use to drive this transition are very cognizant of the context that we find ourselves in. As we imagine a sustainable future for sub-Saharan Africa, I hope that we also complement it with how will our people be more prosperous as a consequence of this green transition. I think if we fail to also extend our conversation to that, we could have saved an environment, but we would not have ensured that the people who are occupying this continent are more prosperous and are better positioned to participate in and benefit from some of the economic opportunities that will be availed to them through the things like the free trade agreement. So I hope that what we can collectively take away from this conversation is that a green transition should also be heavily complemented with ensuring that people are positioned to prosper, whether it is through better jobs or reskilling and skilling that will come with that. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kgomotso. Sarah, as you close, I don't know if you're going to try and answer Stephen's question as well.
Oh, I can give it a shot. It's a big question, Stephen. Can I interest you in a short thesis in response? I guess I'm not sure that I have much of an answer to Stephen's question. I'm afraid it's such a huge question. I'm going to pick up instead on the final points made by my two fellow panelists, which is to say we've heard a lot today about attracting green industries and unlocking investment, and I still believe that that's the pathway for really creating huge numbers of jobs at scale in a new climate constrained world. But I think that particularly picking up on Kgomotso's last point, most people working in African cities and most of the people who will come to African cities are by global standards very green. They have tiny carbon footprints and they are highly exposed to climate risks. And so I really wanted to play up the urban angle again in this conversation, which is to say there is a lot of low-hanging fruit that could be done to make people's lives healthier and more productive in cities at very little cost, without the huge kind of investment and fiscal strategies needed perhaps to land some of these industries. Things like land regularization, partnerships between municipal governments and communities to provide essential infrastructure, making it easier for people to register to vote or to access utilities without legal addresses. Those kind of very small, low-cost reforms have huge opportunities to ensure that the industries and businesses of all sizes that Africa already has are delivering for their people in a much better way. And also then lays the foundations that might make it more attractive for the kind of large-scale green industries we've talked about to come and base themselves in these cities, because they do have that workforce that has achieved a certain standard of living through those urban reforms. So I guess the green industrial story really does need that positive urban story going with it to deliver for the people across the continent.
Thank you so much. Thanks to my panelists and to the last question there or comment there from Kgomotso, just appreciating what we do and sort of seeking us to involve students, as you mentioned earlier, ensure that in these conversations, in this research and these possibilities, we actually make sure that we promote or cultivate the thinking from a very young age. Thank you so much to the speakers here today. Thank you so much to the attendees. And the questions that I asked today, we really value your time and your input in today's conversations. I would like to remind you that there will be a very brief survey at the end of this, just so that you sort of share your experiences and advice so that we can get to do these sort of conversations better in the near future. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.